Hello everyone, my name is Stephen Askew and this is my final project. I'll be walking you through the code and we'll run through some tests and we'll show you how everything works in it. So first, I'm using PyCharm as the development platform, and I'm using Python version 3.9.13. So first, during the code, we are going to have to import some of the various modules that we are going to use, such as logging, traceback, PW input, PSY COP-G2, and then from PSY COP-G2, we're going to use the specific module SQL, and then finally the sys library. So here we set up logging. We're going to export the logs to a folder on this root of the C drive named Python_logs, and we're just going to call it debug_log log. And we're going to set the debug level to, the logging level to debug. And we're going to use the format of the time, level name, and the message. And then the last part of logging is we're going to set the date format. First the minutes, dates, and the year, and then hours, or I'm sorry, the month, date, and year, and then the hour, minutes, and seconds. And now we're going to start the logging right here. Then we need to initialize the variables, which will be the database parameters. First, I wrote a function to get the database credentials and basically return them at the very bottom. So first we're going to initialize the username and password variables. They'll just temporarily stay this until they change. So first we're going to implement a try except block to try to run this code. And basically, while the username input is empty, which means, it could just be somebody hasn't entered it or somebody just didn't enter anything. They hit the enter button and just basically, as long as that input is empty, the username prompt will continue to appear until somebody enters a string. It doesn't matter if the string has numbers, letters, doesn't matter. And they can also press Control-C to cancel it at any time. And if they hit Control-C, then it basically logs this error that says it failed to capture the database credentials. And then it will tell the user that they failed to capture the credentials and the process was interrupted by the user, and then the program will close. So the same goes for the password. It prompts for the password field until the user enters a password. The difference is with this one, it will mask the password using the PW input library. And you can set the different mask. I just use the standard asterisk. So down here we have the else statement, which tells it basically what to do, what this try block to do if it does not encounter an error where the user cancels the input. So basically, it prints a confirmation of the successful credentials capture. Then it logs the event, and gives the username of the username under which the credentials are captured. And finally, it returns that username and password. which will be used in this statement here, where basically this get database credentials function is called, and the results of that function that is called is assigned to a tuple consisting of a DB username and DB password variables, which were initialized. Well, actually, I think they weren't initialized up here. It was something else. So right here, we're going to establish the DB parameters, and these will be used in future functions that will connect to the database. So the next thing we're going to do is to use a try block again to connect to the database. So we're going to print out a statement saying try to connect to database, and then we're going to actually try to connect to the database. We use the DB connection variable, and the DB parameters is actually a list of the different parameters right here. And then if we run into an error, we are going to log it. So what I did was just logged it as connection to the database name on the database host name, which will be localhost, using the supplied username credentials, and it'll say it's unsuccessful. And it'll print out the specific error in the log, but it won't be visible to the user. And then it will tell the user that it was unable to connect to the database. And then it'll say stopping program, and it will exit the program due to a unsuccessful database connection attempt. If there are no errors, a successful connection attempt will be logged, and it will include the database name, database host name, and the database username that was supplied. And it will print a confirmation of the successful connection. The next function is to check for admin privileges. So we're going to initialize the admin user, and then we're going to use a try block where we basically, the same thing as we did for the username password, we're going to prompt the user to enter a user that they want to check admin privileges for until they get a value, and they can hit Control-C to cancel, as previously mentioned. And if they hit Control-C, it'll basically log a message saying failed to capture the user input, process was interrupted by the user, and then closing the program. And then it will physically close the program. If there are no issues when the user enters the admin user, it will say that it's checking for admin privileges for the user, and then it will try to connect using the parameters listed here. And basically, if the results are not found in the table, such as you enter a user that is not part of the is not in the table, it won't say that it won't say that that user isn't found, because that's a security loophole that somebody could just brute force try to just check for different users. It will just say that that user is not an admin, and then it will log that debug message, saying that it was entered as input but not found. So once again, this is not visible to the user, only somebody who has access to the logs. And then if a user is found in the table, it will revert to the else statement, and it will assign the result to the admin variable. And if the user is not an admin, it will print out a message saying that they're not an admin. And it will log that and say it entered as the admin user was entered as input but not found as an admin. If they are found as an admin, it will tell the user that they are an admin, and it will log that as well. The next function is for counting rows. So we initialize the limit variable. We use a try statement, and the same as before, while the limit is empty, the user will be prompted to enter a limit. And basically right here, what we're doing is, I had some issues with it, and the only way I could get this to work was basically convert this input from a string, and we're using the strip part to basically strip off any leading or ending white spaces from the input, converting all of that into an integer, and so that it doesn't give any error messages. And this is where the value error comes in that we just mentioned, the integer. If you don't do this, it will basically throw an error and the program will terminate. So we log it and saying that the value that was entered was not an integer and there was an invalid type, and it will close the program anyway, but it'll do it gracefully. If the user interrupts the input, it will say that they failed to capture the user input, process is interrupted by the user, closing program. Then if there are no issues, it'll continue with these statements. Basically, check the table, try to find the user, and it will return the row count. And then the row count will be logged, and it'll say that it counted X amount of rows in the table with a limit of X. And then it'll print out a message too saying basically the same thing as it said in the error log. So at the end, we're going to call the functions and then use them. So let's go through this process. So I'm going to run it. So we're going to enter a valid username and password. It's successfully connected. So we're going to enter a username to check. So let's enter a valid one that is an admin. It's ran. And then we enter a row limit. So let's just do 10. And it counted 3 rows. So now let's do a bad user. And let's just enter bad PW. It didn't connect and it canceled. So now let's just try to enter some spaces and just some symbols and numbers and just a bunch of random numbers as well. Could not connect. So now let's enter the valid credentials. It connected. So let's check for a user that we know isn't a admin, which will be myself. It says this. Well, it says I'm not an admin, and let's set a row limit of 2. So that's basically it. The test that we'll run through, and then the debug log is located here, and it logs everything that happened while we perform those tests, and it includes all the date, time, and everything. So that is essentially my program, and I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for your time.